Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's solo episode is a super special one for me. If you are tuning in today on the morning that this podcast episode drops, it is the 24th of February, 2025. And that means that I am officially 5 years sober today. Honestly, that blows my mind. It's hard to even fathom in so many ways how I've gotten to this point, and yet I know exactly how I got here. And I've really made sure that in the lead up to this milestone that I've taken some time to just reflect and to really sit and pause and to feel into the magnitude of this milestone. I think that's so important. If you're working towards a goal, whether that's sobriety, or maybe it's something to do with your overall health and fitness, or maybe it's something to do with your career, your family, it doesn't matter what it is. It's so important that we celebrate the wins along the way. I'm a type A person who has in the past, I should say, has always tried to strive and achieve. And, I'll tell you a little bit more about that actually today, because I want to share with you a bit about my story and how I got to the place I was 5 years ago, which was my darkest hour, my absolute rock bottom. But then I want to really talk about how I got out of that and how I have completely turned my life around in 5 years. Because let's be honest, 5 years actually isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. In this big, beautiful experience that we call life, 5 years, it's almost like a blip in many ways. And yet, when I look back at just how different things are, what that goes to show me is that when you continue to show up for yourself every single day, making really small changes, but consistent changes, then you can achieve anything in life. So I really want to empower anybody that's listening along today, if they're wanting to make some changes in their life, to listen along and to take what resonates, take what works for you, and leave the rest. There may be some things that I share today that don't feel super relevant for you, and that's okay as well. That's the beauty of a platform like podcasting, where you can listen to different people's stories and experiences. And that's part of the reason I wanted to create this podcast in the first place, was to be able to share these stories of strength and hope and support you guys in your own journey, however that may look. So like I was saying, I've really wanted to take stock. I wanted to pause and I wanted to reflect, to really honor the fact that I've made it here, to be proud of myself for making it here. Because can I be honest with you? When I walked through the doors of that rehab 5 years ago, so it was the 24th of February, 2020. So this is pre-COVID. The world hadn't shut down until about March of that year. I remember, I think I've told this story before, but if you haven't heard it, it was the night before I was going into rehab, and I remember sitting on the end of the bed. I was at my mum's house down in Melbourne, and I was sitting on the end of the bed in the spare room, and I was talking to my sister-in-law actually. And I was sharing with her how I was really looking forward to going into rehab, because I was going to learn how to drink like a lady. And then I'd be able to come back out into the world and resume as normal and be able to drink and enjoy myself and not create all of this chaos and carnage. I was going to get my life back. That was what I was really determined to do. And it makes me really laugh to think back at that now, because I couldn't have been more wrong. Because here's the thing, I didn't get my life back. I got a brand new life. And it actually makes me feel a little bit emotional as I say that, because every single part of my life has changed for the better. And if you had told me back then, that I was going to lose all of the things that I had, I would have been terrified, truly. To lose the home, to lose the husband, to lose the job. All of those things have changed in my life over the last 5 years. But I can honestly sit here and tell you right now that I wouldn't change a thing. It was almost like, in many ways, I had been trying to control and manage my life that I hadn't allowed any space for the universe to take over, to allow my life to actually move with a state of ease and flow so that what was meant for me could actually pass by me. And so I was experiencing this very small version of life, this very boxed in, narrow version of life, because it was all created around my rules and my ideas and what I thought I needed to be safe. And yet the universe had such greater plans for me. And yet I continued to get into my own way, if that makes sense. I was constantly in my own way of what was actually possible. And it's been in getting sober and doing the work that I've learnt how to actually get out of my own way and hand it over to the universe, to trust my guides, to trust God, and to allow that in. And as a result of that, my life continues to grow and get better and evolve. It's like if I had gotten what I wanted, I would have shortchanged myself. And now I get this big, beautiful life, which honestly, I wake up and I pinch myself. I truly do. There will be moments where I will be doing the most mundane of tasks and I will be hit with this wash of gratitude and contentment. It's the same feeling that I was chasing at the end of a bottle. That feeling of ease and comfort that I so desperately yearned for, that's what I get almost on a daily basis now in my life, because life is so good. And yet I was led to believe that the only way I was able to achieve that feeling was through a drink. So it's crazy, right? I had no intention of being 5 years sober when I walked through the doors of those rehab. I had no intention of being a year sober. But, God had other plans, and I'm so, so grateful that I just continued to show up and do the work, and that I was willing to hand it over, because it's only gotten better since that moment. But like I said, I would have been absolutely terrified, because the unknown is scary. When you don't know what is on the other side, it can be really overwhelming, and it can be really hard to trust something that you can't see. It can be really hard to put your faith in something that isn't tangible. But that's something that I've learned how to do, and it's made all the difference to my experience. But you might be wondering, if you're new to the show, welcome. Hi, my name's Ash. You might be wondering, well, how did you get to the point where you were checking yourself into a psychiatric facility at the age of 32? And I'll tell you, it was a surprise to a lot of people. Part of the reason I started this podcast, Behind the Smile, was because I wanted to share stories of people who were struggling but keeping it all together on the outside, because that was my story. From the outside looking in, if you had looked at my life, you would have thought, oh, she's doing really well. Like I said, I was married, I was living in Bondi, I owned the apartment that I was living in there. I had my dream job, like literally my dream job. I was flying all around the world, working for the world's #1 beauty company globally. It was a dream come true. And yet inside, I was miserable. And it was nobody's fault. This is something that has been such a powerful lesson for me to realize, is that part of the reason I was stuck for so long was because I was always blaming everything and everyone around me. But here's the thing. When you're pointing the finger at someone, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. If you're watching along, you can see me right now, right? And it took me 32 years to fully grasp that as long as I was blaming everybody else, I was disempowering myself. As long as I was blaming everyone else, I was handing my power over to them. Yet once I started to realize that it was up to me, that I was the only one that could change my life for the better, all of a sudden I was empowered. All of a sudden, maybe there was some hope, because if I was able to just follow direction and, like I said, have a little faith and be consistent in showing up for myself, then things could change. I've always had that feeling of not enoughness, that feeling of deep unworthiness. I remember being a really little girl and feeling that way. And I believe that the disease of alcoholism is something that I was born with. I believe that it's a genetic predisposition. Other people have other opinions, but I've got a great episode actually where I talk about that with Aaron Thomas. I can link it in the show notes if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But I do believe that I was born with this disease. And what that means for me is that as a baseline rest, I am irritable, restless, and discontent. I don't feel like I'm enough. And I have this hole in my soul, which I've been looking to fill with food, with alcohol. Later on down the line, it was with sex and relationships. It's the outside stuff to fill the internal void. I talk about this in my TED Talk a lot. This idea that happiness is just over there. And if I can just get that thing, then I'll be happy. If I can just achieve that thing, then I'll be happy. But here's the thing, if you're a type A perfectionist like me, then you keep moving the goalpost. And so maybe you'll achieve the thing and then you'll still be miserable. After I finished my TED Talk last year, I hit such an emotional bottom because I had reached what I thought was this huge milestone, what felt like a huge milestone. And I'll acknowledge the fact that it absolutely is a huge achievement, but I didn't feel any better than I had the day before I'd done the talk. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't be driven to achieve in the hope and desire that it's going to fill a void. Absolutely. I think it's fine to be ambitious. I'm a very ambitious person, and that's just part of my makeup as well. And it's a quality that I really love about myself. But if I am striving, or if I am wanting to achieve something in the hopes that I will get something from you or from the situation around me, then inevitably I will feel empty. Inevitably, I will feel probably worse than I did before because I'm not getting that hit, that thing that I'm looking for. That thing that I'm looking for, what it truly is it's self-esteem and it's self-love, and it's that feeling of enoughness, knowing that I am okay, that I will be okay, and that I have enough and that I am enough. And that is a feeling that I did not have for the first probably 33 and a half years of my life. That did not come to me until I got sober. Because what happens when you grow up as a little boy or a little girl and you have this really deep sense of unworthiness is there's this thing called the inner critic that comes along with that. And the inner critic I call my itty bitty shitty committee. And that in my head was dialed up really loud and it was constant. And the problem with an inner critic is it sounds really convincing because the voice is coming from inside your head. So it's really loud and it sounds like you. So of course you're going to believe it, right? Especially when you're young and you don't even have the executive functioning to discern whether or not a thought is true. You know, we're just going off these negative core beliefs that start to become our reality. And so because I had a lot of these negative ideas and stories about myself, I believed my inner critic. And it was alcohol that was the only thing I found that would turn the volume of that inner critic down. And so I fell in love with alcohol from my first drink when I was 12 years old. I drank to blackout that very first night. If you haven't heard my story, I talk all about that in episode 1. But you know, the way I drank that very first time was indicative of the way I was going to drink for the next 20 years. You know, I never just wanted to have one drink. And when I watch people sit down and have half a glass of wine, like it truly baffles me because I don't understand. Because for me, when I have a drink, you know, if I take a sip of alcohol, it sets off this phenomenon of craving. I want more. It's this insatiable thirst, this quenching that I'm trying to satiate that just cannot be ever, like there's never enough, you know? They say, what is it? 1 is too many and 100 is not enough. Like I totally relate to that. And that's the way I've always drunk and used, to be fair. You know, when drugs were introduced a little bit later on in my story, I would be up all night. Like I couldn't just enjoy 1 or 2 lines. You know, I was always chasing and the mental obsession that came along with that as well. I would be at a restaurant. I would be there having dinner with a group of friends. And the minute somebody mentioned getting on the bags, it was all I could think about. And I would be pestering and chasing until I got that thing. You know, that's what addiction does. It's almost like another part of you that overtakes you and makes you just become so single-minded and focused on that one thing. Because what I was chasing, as I said, was that feeling of ease and contentment, because I felt so uncomfortable within my own skin. And it didn't matter how many friends I had, how many things I had achieved, how many degrees, or whatever was the thing that I was basing my enoughness on at that time. It was never enough, and it never would be enough. And so if you feel like you can relate to that, I want you to think about, like, what are the things that you do to try to seek external validation? You know, is it that you put it all into your loved ones, you know, and you base it off maybe the love that you get from your children or your partner? And that can often fall into a really gray area around codependency. You know, I've had to do a lot of work on that as well. And thank goodness, one of the most beautiful things about getting sober is you get to look at all the other areas in your life. You know, one of the most amazing parts of my journey in sobriety is that I've been able to get really clear on what were the maladaptive coping mechanisms that I developed as a child to survive. And I talk about these coping mechanisms as maladaptive because they weren't healthy. They weren't necessarily, you know, things like being dishonest or being manipulative. They were traits that I had adopted over time because as a child, there were situations where I needed to do that, you know, for survival. And so it's not that I don't want to discount that version of myself. I don't want to talk poorly about her because I actually have a lot of empathy and compassion for that version of myself. She really was just doing the best she could with the tools she had at the time. But once I became aware that I was unwell, that I suffered from an illness that was alcoholism, it did become my responsibility to treat it. And that's what I do on a daily basis. You know, at 5 years sober, I'm more tapped into my recovery than I have ever been in my life. And what that looks like for me is I'm part of a 12-step program, which many of you would know. I show up, I put my hand out for service, I sponsor women, I go to meetings, I do all of that stuff because it's so important to me. Like, I have to put my recovery before everything else. Otherwise, I lose everything else anyway. And I know that to be true. And that's not to say that I've done this perfectly. By no means. There have been periods of time over the last 5 years where I've really resented going to meetings, or my life has started to get really big and busy, especially when I've had a lot of travel happening. You know, I've told myself, oh, I don't need to go to that. I don't need to do that. But it's really interesting. Every time I try to, how does my dad describe it? Take a shortcut. That's right. Every time I've tried to take a shortcut, it's backfired. And then it comes to no surprise that when I just do the suggested things, as we talk about in 12-step program, when I do the suggested things just seem to turn out and I'm looked after and the universe looks after me. I'm just going to have a little sip of water. It is so hot here today. You might have noticed if you're watching, there's a new background behind me because in December last year, we moved into a new house. We've moved into my absolute dream house. It is so incredible. So I'm in my office at the moment. There's actually a recording studio downstairs for the podcast when I have guests. So you'll get to see that. I'm going to start recording in that next week. And then I'm also building a yoga and meditation studio downstairs underneath, like underground, which is going to be really cool. And I'm going to be opening up some different workshops with yoga and breathwork and meditation in the months to come. So I cannot wait to tell you guys about that. It's going to be so exciting, but it's still being built at the moment, so I can't give away too much, but I'll share a lot more information about that on Instagram once it is all up and ready. But yes, it's very warm today. I think it's about 35 degrees and it feels like it's 45 degrees up here. Anyway, I digress. So I want to go back to this idea of looking for something outside of me to soothe the dis-ease, the uncomfortableness that I felt on a day-to-day basis. And when I went into rehab, I actually thought my life was over. You know, I was, like I said, I was so scared of losing everything that I had. But I also knew that I couldn't keep going on the way that I was. I'd gotten to a point with my drinking where I had lost the power of choice. I was waking up every single day promising myself that I wouldn't drink that day. And then by 5 o'clock, I had a glass of wine in my hand. And it just went on like this day in and day out, Groundhog Day. And every morning I would wake up with the guilt, shame, and remorse. I would roll over with a splitting headache, and I would pick up my phone and I would, that feeling, that knotted stomach where I'd be like, oh my goodness, who have I texted? What have I said? Who have I called last night? That would just go on and on and on. So I knew I couldn't keep going that way. And I could see the worry with my family. I could see how concerned they were. And, again, I tell my story about the rock bottom incident. You can go check out episode 1 if you want to hear the full story about that. But I'm so grateful for that experience today, because it's what I needed to get into enough pain to be motivated to take myself to rehab, which is what I needed. I had tried to give up drinking on my own for about 2 years, and I just couldn't. I couldn't even get a day up without drinking again. And so I needed that forced disconnect. I had to be physically removed from alcohol. And then what started to happen is, around 7 to 10 days after I went into rehab, and, I was tapered off with Valium, because alcohol is a highly addictive substance. It's very dangerous to come off cold turkey. So they gave me Valium to taper off, and then I started to get a little clarity. It's almost like the fog started to lift. And it was once that had started to happen that I actually became open to hearing what was around me. And it was this message of hope. It was this message of, you can live life sober and be happy. Because I was convinced that I was going to get sober, but I was going to be miserable. I was going to have no friends. I was going to really hate life. That's what I thought, what was on offer for me. But I thought, at least I won't be hurting everybody that loves me. I didn't really care about hurting myself at that stage. I had so little self-esteem and so little self-love, but I couldn't bear the thought of the pain that I was causing my family members. And once this fog lifted and I started to realize, I started to gain hope for the first time. That's really what it was. I became willing to do whatever it would take to stay sober. And so fast forward, coming out of rehab, that was the 3 of the most intense weeks of my life. I came out, and about 8-10 days later, the world went into lockdown. And I was living with my ex-husband at the time, who was still using. And that was a huge trigger for me. He didn't drink a lot of alcohol, but he was a heavy weed smoker. And so I was put into an environment where I had to live with my trigger in my face every single day in lockdown for a year. And we didn't have meetings. 12-step fellowship meetings weren't happening face to face. So I was doing them on Zoom. So again, I want to ask you, say if removing alcohol from your life is something that you really want, it's like, how far are you willing to go? How desperate are you? What are you willing to do to make sure that you're not going to pick up a drink today? Because that's all it is. Like we talk about it again in 12-step recovery, it's just a day at a time. At the beginning, it might be minute by minute, hour by hour, but they all stack up over time. And sometimes you just have to hold on, hold on for dear life, because it does get better and it does get easier. And every single time I said no to that voice inside my head that was saying, just have a drink. One's not going to hurt. You've been sober now for a few months. I'm sure you can just have one. Like all of these crazy stories that my head would tell me. Every time I ignored that voice, I started to strengthen my resilience. The neuroplasticity started to happen where I was starting to rewire my neural pathways. Sitting here at 5 years sober today, I can honestly tell you that the thought of having a drink does not cross my mind. That was another thing that I thought. I was like, I'm going to have to force myself not to drink for the rest of my life. That's not what happens. Sure, for the first 12 months, it was a challenge. And I was experiencing triggers and cravings and all sorts of physiological responses, as well as psychological and emotional. But over time, it does get easier until you get to a point where something shifts and then you just think to yourself, even if I could drink, I don't want to anymore, because the life that is on offer as a result of getting that clarity of mind and starting to live life in accordance with your values, that is so worth it. That is so worth what is probably the hardest 12 months of your life in the initial stages. But once you get through that, great things start to happen. Because if you think about it, if you're moving through life and you're acting out on behaviors that you're not proud of, and maybe that's happening when you're drunk, or maybe it's the mere fact that you're drinking that you're not proud of. When you're doing that on a daily basis, not only are you breaking a promise with yourself, which is shattering your self-esteem and your self-trust, but it's really, really hard to want to make a change because you've been doing the same repeated behavior over and over again. But once you start to rebuild that trust with yourself, you start to rebuild that self-esteem. And now today, it's very rare that I will do something that I'm not proud of. I used to be full of shame on a daily basis. Honestly, I don't remember the last time I felt that way. There's probably been maybe 1 or 2 times that I've snapped at family members over the last 12 months. And guess what I've done? In those moments, I've paused and I've sincerely apologized, because that's the other beautiful thing. I get to clean up my behavior these days. It blows my mind how different I am. And like I said, I didn't get my old life polished up. I got a brand new life. So much has changed because of this one decision I made 5 years ago. It was the catalyst to the rest of my life transforming. It's what inspired me to become a holistic transformation coach so that I can help other people achieve this same transformation, because I am not unique or special. I'm telling you right now, if I can do it, you can do. But this is the thing. You've got to realize, what are the things that you do that are holding you back? And you may not be an alcoholic. Maybe you just have a few wines a night, but you know that that's stopping you from getting a good night's sleep. You're then not getting up early to do your morning routine and to create space, mental space, stillness, time to reflect and connect in. Because if you're on the hamster wheel of life and you're just running, and you're doing everything for everyone else, and you're never stopping to pause and reflect and have that internal reflection, that self-inquiry, then I'm going to be really honest with you, nothing is going to change. Like, it sounds so simple, but nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you're in a bit of discomfort right now yourself and you know that you want to change, then I want to ask you the question, what actions are you going to take? What are you going to do? What is the one thing that you can do that could change the trajectory of your entire life? I don't want you to think about 5 years from now. I just want you to think about, what can you do to make your life 1% better today? Because the 1% add up over time. 5 years ago, if you had told me that I would be moving from Sydney back to Melbourne, that I would be engaged to a man that wasn't my husband, that I would be working for myself, that I would be running my own business, that I would work with incredible clients all over the world, that I would have a podcast that I had created that was born out of a passion to help other people, that has helped millions of people around the world. If you had told me any of that, I wouldn't have believed you. In fact, I probably would have been really scared and really overwhelmed. But God doesn't give us anything we can't handle. And the more you focus on just giving yourself those 1% increases, the more you can let go of what no longer serves you, the more you can create space to hold more in your life. This is where energetics comes into play. But if you continue doing the same thing every day, you will get the same result. I promise you, that is a given. Now, is this easy? Absolutely not. I was just chatting with a client earlier today. We were celebrating 42 days. She's hit 42 days today. And I really wanted to celebrate with her. I really wanted to acknowledge that milestone, because we can so often just get caught up in the doing rather than realizing that when you choose to do something hard, you want to celebrate it. Like I said at the top of the show, we want to celebrate these things because I'm telling you right now, this path of sobriety is relatively unknown. Not that many people choose to do it because it can be really hard at times. But I promise you right now that it is far more rewarding than any day I ever had drinking. I no longer have the chaos and the carnage that used to follow me around everywhere. I don't remember the last time somebody was disappointed in me. I don't remember the last time I hurt someone. I don't remember the last time I woke up feeling guilt, shame, and remorse. That is a miracle. I used to feel that on pretty much a daily basis. I felt like I was living a lie. I thought that it was really normal to have really big heated arguments with your partner. I thought that it was really normal to fight with your friends. Like that was all the stuff that would just surround me, that was part of my everyday life. None of that is in my life today. I can't stress enough how incredible life is on the other side. I really can't. But I don't want you to focus on that when you're starting out. I just want you to focus on what is ahead of you, what is in front of you for the next 24 hours, and what's the one thing that you can do today that's going to get you that 1% gain. Maybe it is not drinking today. Maybe it is carving out time and space for meditation. You know, this is the other beautiful thing is when you stop drinking, all of a sudden you have time to do all of these other really beautiful soul nourishing practices. You know, I was not a yoga teacher before I got sober. That's something that, you know, I had done yoga on and off, but I'd always done it with the mentality of trying to do it more from a fitness standpoint because I was just wanting to thrash my body and probably sweat out the toxins. And then it was once I got sober and I got that beautiful clarity of mind that I actually connected with yoga on a much more spiritual level. And it has completely transformed my life. You know, and I know I've talked about this before, but I cannot tell you how many similarities there are between the principles of a 12-step program and the yamas and niyamas, which are the principles and foundations of the yogic tradition. Definitely a topic for another day. But what it really is at the end of the day is it's the way I choose to show up and live my life. Like I live by a set of principles now. We call it a design for living. And that requires me to show up on a daily basis and do my best. It asks me to be of service. It asks me to help others. And when I am doing all of that, life is beautiful. Life is truly beyond my wildest dreams. And it keeps getting better. It's honestly just the greatest gift in the world. And to sit here at 5 years of sobriety, thinking back that I didn't even know if I could do 5 days, like it truly blows my mind. And I wouldn't change it for anything. I've had some of the most painful experiences in sobriety, but I know that if I had drunk during any of those experiences, it wouldn't have made it any better. It just would have created a bypass, you know, an emotional bypass where I would have taken that pain and pushed it down, deep down, and I would have had to deal with it at a later date. And it probably would have come up in another situation at a time when I really didn't want to have to deal with it. The beautiful thing I get to do now is I get to process things in real time. I get to feel my feelings. Like, what a foreign concept, you know? And like even the crazy thing of I can walk down the street now and I am not worried about bumping into a single person on this earth. Like I used to walk down the street with my eyes down thinking, oh God, I really hope I don't see that person. Or I'd be so hungover, or I'd be like, oh no, I've had beef with them. Or oh no, I kissed her boyfriend when we were at high school, and like all of this messy behavior that I was running from. Like I'm free of that today. Sobriety has given me the gift of freedom. I have peace in my heart. And because of that, I get to show up in a really loving way, and I get to give back to other people. Like, there is honestly nothing more rewarding than that. And so if you're on the journey, then I just want to say I am so proud of you. Keep going. You are amazing. Maybe you've been on the journey for decades and you've tuned in today to hear a message from someone who is still in their early years. I heard once actually that they say at 5 years of sobriety, you get your marbles back, and at 10 years you learn how to play with them. So I'm looking forward to learning how to play with my marbles over the next 5 years. That's something to look forward to. Or maybe you're 5 days and you're listening along today looking for a message of hope and to hear that it is possible. Because like I said, I am not special or unique in any way other than I just chose to show up for myself every single day. And every single day I told myself, I promised myself that I wasn't going to drink today. And I kept that promise, and I've continued to keep that promise. And here's the thing. When you keep a promise to yourself every day, you start to trust yourself again, and you start to build that self-love and that self-worth, which for many people who are drinking too much alcohol is something that is all but gone. You know, it's non-existent. So we get to heal on this journey. We get to grow. And if you're not a sober human and you're just tuning along today to support the show, to hear more stories about hiding behind the smile, then I want to thank you for being here as well. I'm so excited that Behind the Smile is back. My mission this year is to make this show bigger and better than ever so that more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. You know, 5 years ago, when I was stuck, when I was in my absolute darkest hour, there wasn't a single person on my Instagram that was sober. There wasn't these sober podcasts. There wasn't anything. And that's why when I came out of rehab and I was in my second year of sobriety, I knew that I wanted to make a difference and that I wanted to lift the veil on these stories. And I will always be so real and raw and honest with you guys, because to be honest, there can still be, I see it myself, a lot of people out there who are only showing shiny sobriety, who are only showing the good stuff. And yes, there's a lot to celebrate, but guess what? There's also some really hard days as well. And if you're in that hard season right now, I see you. I want you to know that it will get better. But like I said, it never gets better by having a drink. That is one thing I know for sure. So if you want to help the show, I would love you to share the podcast with someone you know, someone who you think might get some benefit out of hearing these stories. When you guys share the show, when you subscribe, when you rate and review, the show grows, it gets into the hands of more people, and together we can help more people collectively around the world. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for supporting the show. I want to thank you for being here today, for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see you next week when we recover loudly. No one needs suffer in silence. So thank you for being here today.